This is the brief homily for the 20th of June. Please read the readings before listening to the homily. It took a crisis. Job was brought up with what we might think of as an infantile faith. To be fair to him, it was the default where he lived at his time, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Well, he was a good person, but very bad things had happened to him. He'd lost his fortune. He had been a wealthy man. His children had died. He had a horrible disease. The three friends who came to comfort him started off well. They just sat in silence with him for a while. But when they did speak, well, they more or less told him, "Man up and admit that you must have done something to deserve this." He knew he hadn't. Well, in this reading, the first reading, it's God who responds. And he turns Job's attention away from himself towards God. The saints tell us again and again, if we're suffering desolation, move our attention away from ourselves and onto God. Now, one of the roots of that infantile faith, it's expressed in what's become a very successful marketing technique, summed up in the phrase, "because you're worth it." It's skillfully applied to make us crave things we don't need and possibly can't afford. So, good because you deserve it, bad because you deserve it. Well, Job knows he hadn't deserved it. But what about our good things? If God has made us to know him, love him and serve him in this life and be happy with him forever in the next, what had we done to deserve that gift? 9 months before my birth, what had I done to deserve God making me with the intention of giving me eternal joy? It took a crisis. The people in that boat thought they'd got Jesus pegged. He was a miracle-working teacher, inspiring like no other. But then the storm came, and their faith jumped up a level. They realised they hadn't got him squared away. Who is this? Even the wind and sea obey him. It wasn't until after the resurrection that they could begin to understand who Jesus is. It took a crisis. Paul once knew Jesus in the flesh. He interpreted him as another human being. From Paul's perspective, when his name was Saul, a troublesome, rabble-rousing preacher who thankfully had been successfully executed. Paul's crisis on the road when he was struck with blindness and heard the voice from heaven enabled him to transition from being a persecutor of the followers of Jesus to being an apostle of the Christian faith. If we're growing up in a culture where we are constantly drip-fed because you're worth it, if we have an infantile faith, well, for a start, it's fine to have an infantile faith if you're an infant. But God has something greater for us in store. How do we escape from it? One thing we can do is to keep our crucifix where we can see it often. When we catch sight of the suffering Jesus in agony on the cross, we can look at it and remind ourselves, well, it can't be true that bad things happen only to bad people. Look what's happening to Jesus. Our growth in faith isn't some steady curve. It's often, if not always, a crisis that serves as a growth spurt in our spiritual development. They're uncomfortable, but we grow through them. Let's recognize those times and be ready for our existing faith to be shaken up a bit so we can move up to the next level. One indication we might be moving out of infantile faith is we find ourselves asking, what have I done to deserve this? When something good happens to us. And the answer is nothing. God only needs two reasons for giving us beautiful gifts. Firstly, the gift is beautiful. Secondly, God loves you.